Hey, Chris.
Hey, Mas.
Welcome to the farm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the.
Thank you for having me here.
This is our farm. I'm a third, fourth generation on this. In that sense, grandparents came from Japan, farm workers, because they couldn't own land, because Orientals were barred from owning property in California.
Wow.
So then my parents were born here. Went through the internment camp, the whole family, because of World War II. I was born after that, raised on this farm. We had, peaches, nectarines, and grapes for raisins. Then I ran away for college and came back to farm here. I started farm organically and raised our family here too.
Nice.
So tell me about your background.
I had an idea to go into the community and use a way that folk that were getting in trouble to get them out of that way of living and thinking and get them out in the country. Get them out in the country.
Totally
it was about community service. That's
and
what it's always been about.
A different rhythm of life and relationships.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And since then, it's just went to so many different avenues, you know what I'm saying? But initially, it was a thought to have a farmer's market. Have a farmer's market, have a garden, a community garden.
Yeah.
That's how it all started.
Yeah.
And so it's been a journey. But I have 3 acres now that I currently do small vegetables on.
Perfect.
I've been using it as a tool to somewhat educate. As I learn, I'm allowing others, the community, to learn with me. So that's my goal, to learn and then to allow others, the community, to learn with me. And so I've been doing a lot of work with like foster youth and stuff like that. And somewhat going into schools and kind of talking to schools. I went to Edison High School and I believe Roosevelt High School and some of the other smaller charter schools. And it's somewhat being an advocate for African American farmers. And not just African American farmers, but Latino farmers, Asian farmers, mainly BIPOC, people of color. Just introducing them, letting them know that this is a beautiful land and there's history. And trying to bring back that history that's something that was kind of lost.
Yeah, it's interesting to realize, especially in the valley, there's been waves of immigrants usually working in the fields. When my dad took this huge gamble and bought this farm right after the war, we were poor, we were struggling. But a couple things he knew, and my dad wasn't radical or anything, he was just hardworking.
Right.
But he said he realized that if you were going to become something successful in America, you had to buy land.
Wow.
Right. So he took a big gamble and bought this land. And I remember hearing this story when he bought the farm. Right. It should be a celebration. My grandmother was furious. Right. And they had just gone through, her being an immigrant, not being able to own land herself because she was an alien, going through the internment and being imprisoned because of the way they looked. So she told my dad, "You made a big mistake because in America they take things away."
Oh wow!
And she was right, But yet my dad said, "No, we have to do this." So he told me that they were living on some rented land in a shack, and they drove to this new farm, which had an old house on it, and they, instead of celebratory, they drove in silence. And really, that is this legacy of how I work too. This understanding of, when you're farming, you're somewhat isolated, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. There's this solitude that you have. And that's part of, I think, too, what you're talking about, having people reconnect with their past.
Yes.
And that reconnection creates this feeling, this emotion. And that's why I write, right? Because it's the story. The storytelling that's as important, and it's the story of the food that we grow that's so vital to what we do on that. And I think that's exactly what you're trying to do. We do here on our farm as much as possible. We have a couple of things where we bring groups of people on the farm. One thing we do is we do this adopt a peach tree.
Right? Oh, nice.
And it came from we were selling some peaches through Whole Foods into New York City, and they must have sold out of our peaches. This is what I think happened. So they put someone else's peaches on the Whole Foods stand without switching the name. So this guy from Brooklyn wrote me this letter, nasty letter, saying, "These are the worst peaches I've had. You should be ashamed," right? And then I felt really bad. And I remember my wife saying, "Don't worry, people from Brooklyn this is how they normally talk. They probably liked your food because they're paying attention to it and everything. But the whole idea, though, it got me thinking, if that person knew what it was like to pick a peach, they'd realize that it's a challenge to find out what's ripe and perfect versus what isn't quite ripe. And that's what led me to develop this idea that let's bring people back to the farm.
Nice.
But they just don't do a U-pick. They adopt a tree. They have ownership to
I
that
like that
tree.
idea.
But the tree actually may have 300 to 400 pounds of fruit. So you don't do it by yourself.
Yeah.
You have to do it as a group.
Yes.
Which is food is enjoyed communally.
Yes.
You know, if you think of your best meals, it's usually not by yourself.
Right.
It's with others, it's with family, it's with community, it's with strangers, but you get to know people through food.
Yeah.
You know. So this idea is that people would come to the farm, adopt a tree, and the wonderful thing is they go, what are we going to do with 300 pounds of fruit? I can't do it all myself. And the idea is you have to share it.
Community.
Yeah.
Community.
You have to, and then finding out that people go back and go, well, maybe I'll give a box to my neighbor, or maybe I'll take some to work. And now we're getting a tradition where people understand that communal aspect of food.
I like that.
And that's really, really important like that. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's so awesome.
it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
One of the things that I was so wanting to connect with community is eating healthy foods. Eating foods without pesticides. And I know there's certain things and certain levels that you could have, but just being cautious of those levels that we put, or whatever the case would be.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that really drove me, you know, eating healthy, and then letting, like you say, I like that part, which community, take ownership.
Yeah.
Take ownership, because a lot of people, you know, they know no more about food than just going to the store and just picking something out of the grocery market, you know what I mean? But to see it, to grow it.
Yeah. And the challenge when they don't know the story of food, the only thing they value is price.
Yes.
And suddenly it's like, this is the only way I could determine if I'm successful, by the price of my peaches, of my nectarines or apricots and stuff. And I go, that sucks, because it's almost as if you're saying you're only worth by what you're making. And that's not how I want to relate with people. It's not by their salaries and how much money they have, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's about who they are. You know, and that's why if we could start doing, and I think you're, you know, I know you're doing this, where you're trying to create a new value structure, and the value isn't based on money.
Okay.
It's based on other things, right?
Yeah.
History, character, people's background, the youth that you work with. I bet you they're coming from all kinds of backgrounds.
Of course,
you
most
know?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that adds value to what you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
You met CAFF, what, over 40 years ago?
Oh yeah.
So what brought you to them? What
Good
brought you
question.
to them?
Well, I was in the early stages of CAFF developing. What I was looking for with CAFF was community. You know, like-minded. Most of us were small. Most of us were looking for a different way, maybe a better way of farming, not the traditional getting bigger corporate route. And as I saw it then, the way to be successful in big ag is you make money. That's the only criteria that means you've succeeded. And I'm going, no, I'm going to have a family on the farm. You know, we're going to be growing, different type of things. I want to enjoy my work, not just work to work. And that's what attracted me to CAFF. So a group of us started getting together and started having discussions, and how can we develop an organization that supported what we do, and like-minded people started getting together and talking. And I think that was the birth of CAFF. In those early days, what was interesting, one of the big questions was, is this a voluntary organization, or is this something that has staff? Because those are two different directions. A voluntary one means it's going to be loose, informal, but we don't have to worry about raising money to pay someone's salary.
Right.
So that's one. And I thought, oh yeah, maybe that's sort of like a church. Then we'd go, where you pay the pastor, or you pay the one leader, or of the, but you don't have, everything else is done on voluntary contributions. And the other path was, no, we're going to do an organization, and we want staff. One is going to do different. They're going to do two different types of work. And it actually evolved the way it should have evolved. If it was a voluntary one, it probably would have disbanded, because all of us original founders would have gotten old, and we said, "Oh, hey, we're fine now. Let a younger group do make their own version of a new CAFF
Wow.
and everything. But instead, they went in this other direction where we hired staff, and then with it, we had to say, well, we need to figure out how to fund this and all that, which was exactly the right thing to do, And then it got into policy, right? Voluntary organizations often don't get into policy. They think about potlucks. Which is very important, But policy is the other side of it that needed to be done. And it was one thing that us as small growers, I'm working, hours and hours in the field. It was hard for me to start thinking, okay, what's the policies issues dealing around farming and everything from water to land use to, chemicals to marketing and insurance programs and things like that. So that's where CAFF came in. And started filling that gap in the policy that we were looking for on that.